Good afternoon, everyone. I always do that. Look, I've got the little frame. It's taking some of my spikes off. There we go. Hope everyone can hear me okay. You know how paranoid I get about this stuff, so do give us a thumbs up on the chat if you can hear okay, wherever it is you're listening to it. I'm Jack Chew, 12:30 to 1 o'clock on weekdays. We chew it over and we talk about all things topical in the world, usually of MSK and the things that I'm most interested in, but also where that sometimes intersects with current affairs and whatever else is going on in the world. On at least our Wednesday, I usually say it's like first Wednesday of the month, last Wednesday of the month. Our Wednesday of the month, me and my friend Joe Turner do a Wellbeing Wednesday. We try to time it for what is appropriate. And it's certainly appropriate today because we're 2 days away from Therapy Live, and she's got lots of stuff that she's doing on the show, as well as lots of reflections she's been sharing with us about what that means and how that can sometimes affect people's well-being in positive and, of course, compromising ways sometimes. So hopefully with the click of a couple of buttons. Annoyingly though, the chat function seems to be playing up a little bit, which it did to me last week at one point, and it didn't sort itself. So I'm a bit nervous of that. But what I will promise is if that doesn't come online and you guys are participating, I will be scurrying along on my phone and checking where else you might be commenting, because if there's a guest on, then I should be talking far less. Them's the rules. So hopefully I can click and Joe can join me. Joe, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Lovely. Well, I don't know if you just heard him, but the chat function seems to be just sort of booting up.
Yeah.
Or it might be that you can see it and I can't. And
no, I can't. Well, I can't see any comments.
Nothing yet.
No.
So not to worry. We'll crack on. So tell folk a little bit about what you've got in store, because you obviously, one of the first people to know where we're doing it, know the dates of it, start to help us build and promote some content for it. But almost top of the team sheet, really, it was like some of the sessions that we wanted to do were because of the hunger that had come out of, especially the last show, like lots of things, and also some of these Wellbeing Wednesdays as well. What are the themes you've picked up on what you're going to be talking about?
Well, my keynote is imposter syndrome, which we have talked about a lot on this program, and I've done a whole podcast on it and had lots of conversations off these platforms as well. And unsurprisingly, that phrase is like a touch paper. People are starting to understand what it is and want to talk about it. But specifically for this keynote, I think it might have been your reflection, Jack, to look at how it potentially affects your relationship with your patient. So I've kind of taken that theme, but expanded on it a little bit, because I think imposter syndrome, it does a lot of things to us. I think it keeps us small, it keeps us anxious, it keeps us conforming, but it also kills relationships. And I won't give the whole talk now, but a lot of the subject of the session is around, I've called it the invisible wall, because in my mind it creates this barrier between you and other people. And when you're working as a physio, that other person happens to be your patient, but I think imposter syndrome creates a kind of wall or barrier around us in all relationships. So I'm going to sort of look at it from those two sides, what it does to you personally and what it does to your relationships. So that's the keynote. I'm also hosting a panel on burnout. So I think burnout is a term that most people probably would have been familiar with before the pandemic, but it's certainly, if you've read any news articles or reports around the pandemic, particularly in relation to medics and NHS work, then burnout has been mentioned a lot. And I'm a bit jury's out whether it's a useful phrase or not, because I think there's a danger it's a bit of a catch-all for lots of things. And you could go two ways. Either it's quite a strong word, and I think some people feel that burnout sounds really dramatic, and I'm not properly burnt out. That's literally, as the term suggests, lying on the floor in a pile of ashes. Or the opposite, that it trivializes it and it misses diagnoses of things like depression and anxiety, things that really need to be picked up but might be underplayed under the umbrella of burnout. So with the panel, I'm going to try and sort of dig into that a little bit, really to make sure that people are getting the right help that they need, and that they're feeling that they can talk about what they're going through because they understand the terms. And then the final panel that I'm a guest on is with Andy Hosgood and Obi Hassan. And I was intrigued to be invited on this one, but really pleased. So this one is under the heading of financial health. And I'm going to come at that one really from the paradigm that I believe we grow up in as health professionals, which I believe is that we don't actually have much of a relationship with the concept of wealth, certainly in our early days, and at its worst, possibly grow up with a notion that to be interested in wealth is something to be frowned upon. I do quite a lot of work in coaching, looking at people's values, and from memory, I can't remember a single health professional that brought up wealth as an important value in their life. And I don't know if that's strictly true, whether we're motivated by other things and wealth just isn't important, or whether it is this feeling that we shouldn't be interested in it. But then on the back of that, there's an awful lot of conversation around hourly rates and what we're worth and things like that. And then the other side that I want to bring into that is that I think it fits with well-being. So I think personal value and sense of self-worth has to be there before you can really value yourself in wealth and monetary terms. The two things, I don't think one can necessarily happen without the other. So that's definitely Andy and Obi's platform in terms of the numbers, the KPIs, the spreadsheets that are not straying into that world at all. I'm going to try and back it up with a little bit of the human side of finances.
That'd be funny, wouldn't it? Yeah, if you surprised everyone by just like, here's a spreadsheet.
Yes, we're going through profit and loss.
It's the same person. But I think just to double back around on the keynote then, that it was me that sort of brought forward that at its worst, it's something that therapists that I've worked with, that even pointing out the fact that the imposter syndrome that they're facing and this sort of being sort of intimidated and humbled by this experience in such a way that then it kind of compresses them, limits them, puts the ceiling too low over their head. When pointing out the fact that isn't then making you the decisive person you need to be sometimes with your patients, but also that then is compromising the care delivery that you hold so dear, that you are feeling, that's often where they are feeling more of an expert than they would do, say, public speaking. That has tended to be like a penny drop moment for many, and I think it's because it's help. And I'm excited to see whether you feel it does tend to be is it a side effect of it? Is it actually a big key part of it? Is our public persona that includes patient contact? I've admittedly always seen it as being like, here's a consequence of this that you've not thought of. Whereas, I wonder whether it's actually all part and parcel of it and happens to everyone. What is this invisible barrier? And although I know you don't want to give the whole talk, could you just give me a few clues, because I'm intrigued.
Well, I think you brought up then, I think you said decision making and the quality of care that you deliver to the patient. I think one of the things imposter syndrome kills dead is imagination and creativity.
Right.
Because you've got to be flexible and relaxed and coming from a place of sort of personal security, I think, to be creative and flexible in your treatment protocols. And it's not all that. I know that when you're starting out, you really want those protocols and you need that framework to build your confidence. But then it's later in your career, not much later, I hope, that you start to play with things and bring yourself into the physio persona. And I think to deprive the patient and your colleagues and our organizations of those sides of you is so sad. This phrase has come up while I've been creating these sessions of conform and perform. So I think if we're coming from a place of imposter syndrome, we start to behave in a conforming way. So certainly when I was training, I felt like I received a lot of information about how was a good way to present myself and to behave. And Leanne touched on this beautifully yesterday. That you start to get this sense that there are some channels in which it would be best if you stick within. And playing with those can feel quite scary. But then ironically, as you say, the people that you interact with suffer if you're not allowed to do that, because that's where your real magic and your power comes as a therapist, when you discover the things that you do better than anybody else, not because it's difficult or that you've had to learn it